I'm Josh Schneider-Weiler, coming up on Football Today. Last Sunday, scenes turned ugly in France's biggest game, Le Classique.
With a little nudge on Paredes, that was deliberate, and Paredes has reacted. Paredes will be off all right.
Yep,
he's been booked, but that's a red card. And Paredes has done it again. This is going to be a long suspension, I suspect. Crazy thing to do. And look at this, is a kick from Amavi on Kazawa.
Kazawa and Amavi.
They're going to have to pick the bones out of this, but Paredes is definitely going to be sent off, and I think he has to send Amavi off for sure as well for the kick. Well, look at this, it ends in disgrace.
What a disaster for PSG as a club.
There were kicks, punches, and allegations of racism, homophobia, and spitting. But when the dust settled, Marseille was the victor, 1-0. It was the first time Marseille had beaten PSG in the league for 9 years. And with 2 losses to open the season, PSG's position at the top of French football now looks vulnerable. Today we ask, can Marseille make a Ligue 1 title challenge?
Seeing the Classic end in such a way as it did with red cards and players being sent off was a bit difficult to see.
Eric Devin is a French football expert and works as a chief features writer for Get Football French News, as well as the Guardian and WhoScored.
We had seen a brilliant weekend of football across France, and it was really exciting to see, after a weekend filled with goals, to have this be the showcase match, even if both sides were going to be diminished a little bit in terms of their starting 11. But to have it end with such untoward behavior at come the end of the match, and to have multiple players sent off and accusations of racism and spitting.
And it was a little rabbit punch from Neymar to the back of Gonzalez's head when that fracas took place.
Well, you hear what he said. There was a racist comment there, that's why I did it.
Well, the content of things may have been a bit difficult for the league to stomach. I do think that for both of these teams to evince such passion and such fire could be a good advertisement for the league, were it not for the content of some of what players have been accused of doing.
Well, let's talk about that for a little bit. Before we discuss the game and Marseille more in depth, I want to look at some of the ramifications of that game. You know, for PSG, Neymar was banned 2 matches plus a 1-game suspended sentence after hitting Alvaro Gonzalez in the head. Leandro Paredes was given the same ban. Layvin Kurzawa got a 6-game suspension. And perhaps even more worrying, Angel Di Maria will appear in front of the LFP disciplinary committee next week for potentially spitting on Gonzalez. And for Marseille, Jordan Amavi got a 3-game suspension, and Dario Benedetto got a 1-game suspension. You know, how big are these suspensions for these two teams in general, and how could they impact the title race kind of down the line?
I think for Marseille, I would not worry about Amavi. He is a somewhat injury-prone player, and they have 2 backups for him. Hiroki Sakai, who's normally the right back, can play on the left, and they also signed this offseason Yuto Nagatomo, another veteran Japanese international, who is a left back by trade. So I really wouldn't worry about Marseille at this point. Dario Benedetto has already served his suspension in yesterday's loss to Saint-Etienne. For PSG, however, there is a big question there. We've received news yesterday that Juan Bernat has done his ACL in their win over Metz on Wednesday, and he's expected to be out some 6 months, as people who suffer from that injury normally are. That leaves Mitchell Bakker as the nominal first-choice left back going forward. And while he has looked decent in preseason and friendlies this season, I do question whether or not he has the quality to continue to lead PSG forward. And Juan Bernat, as a player, I think in particular, he's someone whose absence could be really problematic, given how well he dovetails with Neymar on that left side and how well he can cover for the Brazilian. And, you know, Bakker is not by any stretch of the imagination a player who doesn't work hard, but again, fostering that relationship to get the best out of PSG going forward on that left side is something that's going to be really crucial, especially as we have seen them struggling for goals to date. Have their last-minute winner on Wednesday being the only goal that they have scored to date in the league.
And what about the suspensions for PSG, you know, specifically Neymar, Kurzawa, and perhaps even Angel Di Maria? I mean, do you think Angel Di Maria will get a long and lengthy ban?
I think since there is incontrovertible video evidence in the case of Di Maria that will happen. I think we could be looking at 6, 8, 10 matches, a pretty lengthy ban. Not necessarily the worst thing in the world. They do have options to cover for him in terms of Pablo Sarabia on the right flank, or even Kylian Mbappe being played wide and Mauro Icardi taking a central role. So I think that PSG can ride that out in the league, and especially with fixture congestion. Di Maria is a player who's 33 this season. I think that we can look at that as not being the worst thing in the world, given that they will be able to have him feature in the Champions League group stages, which, if he does receive a lengthy ban, those two periods will overlap. Again, Kurzawa is the bigger problem, though, because PSG will again be forced to rely on youngster Mitchell Bakker in the absence of Juan Bernat, and I think that could be really problematic, given they don't have necessarily a senior left back, if you will, in the absence of those two players. Neymar will be back next weekend, and as will Paredes, and I think that there's nothing too much to worry about from the relatively short absences of those two players.
Getting back to what happened on the field, what did you make of both teams in that game? Was it a fluky win for Marseille?
I wouldn't say fluky per se. I would say that Steve Mandanda was outstanding. This is a goalkeeper who's been around for a long, long time, and I think that his ability to make saves, to roll back the years, even at 35, is really, really impressive.
Neymar with an extra gear, dishes for Florenzi, back to the middle, kick save, Sarabia denied. Mandanda to the rescue again.
The Spider-Man spreads his web beautifully, Stevie. It's not the greatest finish, it comes directly at him, but his quickness on the line.
I think that that's something that the team continue to take heart from. One of the most important things for me that Andre Villas-Boas has done in his time of taking over at Marseille is to get big performances out of the likes of Dimitri Payet, out of the likes of Steve Mandanda, players who some would have had 2 or 3 years ago, these players being on the downside of their careers. But I think that under Villas-Boas, they've been frankly rejuvenated and they look fantastic. So keeping that in mind, I think that we need to give credit to Marseille's defense, Marseille's goalkeeping, but also acknowledge that, yes, PSG definitely had the run of play, and this could have gone the direction for the hosts.
Did you learn anything about Marseille that's important for this season based on just that game alone or in their first 3 games?
I think what we learned is that this team is still finding its feet in terms of how they're linking things together. I think that as well as they did last year under Andre Villas-Boas, they did not have Florian Thauvin all season, and now he is back and has had a wonderful start to the season. He's been involved in all 4 goals the club have scored to date.
Payet stands over it. Great quality from him for Florian Thauvin. And it's Thauvin finally at the Parc des Princes. And it's Marseille who have the lead.
How that team relates to each other with Thauvin back in the side is going to be important. So making sure that they do have a little bit more attacking cohesion is going to be important. Last year, this team is definitely built on its defensive solidity, the partnership of Duj Sledashar and Alvaro Gonzalez at the back, as well as the strong play of Mandanda. And I think now moving forward into the current season, they're going to need to strike a bit more of a balance between attack and defense, and how well Thauvin is fitted into the side, along with Dario Benedetto and Dimitri Payet, is going to be really key for them this season. So finding that balance could potentially be a challenge for Andre Villas-Boas as his team sort of rethinks its ethos in terms of how it approaches play.
Un petit peu dans son comportement. Et les 4 dernières secondes, c'est terminé. Et la victoire 3-0 de l'Olympique de Marseille dans ce Classico. C'est dans les matchs de la 15e journée. Marseille qui ce soir renaît de ses cendres, et le Paris Saint-Germain, plonge-t-il dans la crise? Pas encore, mais le Paris Saint-Germain surtout.
Before last weekend, Marseille hadn't beaten PSG in their last 20 games, and the last time they had won before that was in 2011. How big do you think that was for their confidence going in and starting the season like that?
It was a surprise for most that this fixture had come so early in the calendar. PSG had protested against it, given that it came so quickly on the back of their Champions League campaign. But I think that more than anything, what we need to look at is the way that the Marseille players celebrated this. Even with the bad blood at the end of the match, there were videos on social media. They know this is a rivalry, and a lot of these players have been there for several years. I know that there are some new arrivals this summer in terms of Papke, Leonardo Bellardi, but there are a lot of these players. You look at Paye, Mandanda, Jordan Amavi, Bunassar. These are players who have been there for 4, 5, 6 years or more than a decade. And we can see how much this means to them, given the history of the club, given the history of this rivalry. And I think absolutely, even though yesterday's result didn't go as Marseille would have wanted, there's certainly a lot that they can build on in terms of playing on the counter and having a solid defensive performance that they can build on, not only domestically, but in the Champions League, where as part of the fourth pot, when that group stage draw does come around, they are going to be facing sides that are ostensibly better than them and certainly more gifted going forward. So there's something to be taken from that, both domestically and as the team looks ahead to the Champions League.
So let's talk about how Marseille got here. On May 28th of last year, Andre Villas-Boas took over from Rudy Garcia. Why did Garcia leave, and what was the state of the club when Boas inherited it?
The state of the club at that point in time was a team under serious financial difficulty. They were very limited in sorts of players they could bring in. Dario Benedetto has been brought in as a striker prior to last season, but Marseille had been crying out for a striker, an orthodox striker, for years. I mean, really since you had Michy Batshuayi and Andre Pierre-Gignac leave, and that was 2014. So this team has been hamstrung by financial regulations in France. There's something called the DNCG, which is a financial regulatory body which is very stringent in terms of clubs' finances, far more so than FFP would be in the UK or in the realm of UEFA. And Marseille were under serious pressure to sell players and to balance their budget, and they couldn't bring in the sorts of players they wanted. So through a mixture of that and sort of a bit of stagnation to Rudy Garcia, he left. And Villas-Boas, a player whose reputation in England might be not the best given his time at Chelsea and Spurs, but I think really is a very talented manager and has shown that. His arrival was sort of greeted with some trepidation, and some have questioned whether that was indeed the right way to move the club forward. But he seems to be hungry again to create some level of success following a bit of time away from the game. And I think that he's shown over the course of the time he's been in charge at the club, his ability to lead this team forward and to remake them despite working with limited means.
With his arrival came a new system and a new way of playing. Can you describe Marseille's playing style under him?
Yeah, so I think that last season, again, with that absence of Thauvin, and with Dario Benedetto sort of having a bit of a hard time adjusting to a new league. Benedetto was a striker. He started out very strong, then sort of fell away. The team had a bit of an identity crisis. And I think more than anything, though, what Villas-Boas has done is to build this team around a strong defensive identity, using the leadership and veteran ability of Paye, Steve Mandanda to get the best out of these players, bring in an experienced player like an Alvaro Gonzalez, but also to improve young players. We've seen Boubacar Kamara, who started out as a central defender but is now a defensive midfielder, take big strides forward. Duji Coletta-Star, the same thing. He was a player who, under Garcia, was out of shape, and even by his own admission. And I think that the strides he's made in his physical game and his tactical play have really been impressive. And I think that Villas-Boas has shown a couple things. He's shown good acumen for organization and good acumen for improving young players. And we know that Ligue 1, as a league that is within the last decade or so, has seen lots and lots of young players come through. That's going to continue to be important. So balancing a side that has a veteran presence and young players and improving all of them throughout, I think is really impressive. We've talked as well about Dimitri Payet, who is a player who hasn't necessarily been at his best. His levels improved. Steve Mandanda's levels improved. So improving players on an individual basis, as well as getting this team to function with cohesive spirit as a whole, are really obviously those things one would hope any manager would do. But I think Villas-Boas in particular, given the level of stagnation that had existed at Marseille, has done a really excellent job in not only improving players, but also forging a collective mentality that has served them well.
If we look back to last season, it almost seems from afar as a tale of two seasons. They won only 4 of their first 11 games and then had a big 4-0 loss to PSG. And then after that loss, they won 12 of their next 17 games before the season was obviously canceled. What did he do to kind of turn the season around?
I think that what he did to turn the season around was really to again, double down on what he wanted this team to be. A switch to a 4-3-3 made a big difference. Playing a more defensively sound midfield, I think, is really important. The typical midfield here, Abubakar Kamara, who has a great range of passing, but also has a physical strength as a defensive midfielder, is also more mobile. I think that made a big difference too. Kevin Strootman had been playing that role a little bit more often, and Strootman, for all of his experience, I think is not a player who gets around the pitch very well. And I think that in sort of reinventing that midfield and giving a little bit more license to get forward to the likes of Morgan Sanson and Valentin Rongier, or Maxime Lopez when Lopez has played, I think has really been important, because obviously, again, lacking Thauvin throughout the course of the season, Marseille had to do something to both shore up the defense and put a little bit more verve into their attack. And by moving Kamara out of defense and into midfield, I think that he made that switch, which accomplished both of those things very well. Even if Marseille weren't exactly a brilliant attacking side last season, I think that the changes made in freeing up Sanson and Rongier really made a big difference in terms of adding a bit of drive to the attack.
I thought there was a pretty telling quote from Amavi last season talking about Dimitri Payet. And Amavi said of Payet, quote, "I've never seen him defend so much." And to me, it seems like Villas-Boas has kind of changed the attitude of players. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. Like I said, Payet and Mandanda are the prime examples of players who look like the players they were 5 years ago, not the players they were 2 years ago. I think that we had perhaps seen at that point in time, say 2017, 2018, that Payet and Mandanda seemed like spent forces. But I think that they're back at or near their very, very best. And it's really impressive to see that come under the influence of Villas-Boas in the dressing room. I think that getting players to work hard, even if there's not much at stake for them per se, I think that we've seen Dimitri Payet throughout his career be alternately motivated and not, given how close we are to international tournament, not to be too cynical. But now that he's not playing for France anymore, I think that we can look at what Villas-Boas has done as a real accomplishment in terms of getting Payet particularly to be more of a team player. He's never, again, Amavi is correct. Payet has never been a player who has done much defensively, and given that they play on the same flank, I can see how Amavi feels positive about that.
What would have to go right for Marseille to make a serious title challenge this year? You seemed in your recent piece in The Guardian that you think they have a chance.
I do think they have a chance. I think that they have to be free of injuries and free of any lengthy absences from COVID-19 and not to lose players. Again, I mentioned the DNCG, the French financial authority, as it relates to clubs in the league. I feel that if they do end up selling a player, as it's been mooted, Douye Coletta-Sarr has been mentioned as potentially being sold. If they were to suffer any heavy number of absences or departures, that could really undo them. This is a very, very, very thin squad. And not to be too cynical again, but I think that elimination from the Champions League or European football as a whole in the group stage could also be a good thing for them in terms of chasing the league title. I think that PSG's, again, is the primary contender for the league title, are still a squad that's very flawed, particularly with the loss of Bernat. I think that's really going to be something that's going to present a lot of issues for the capital side this season. So I think there's an opportunity there, given that Lyon are still struggling and that most of the other top sides will be dealing with European football as well. So if they can sort of ride through that challenge of the the Champions League group stages through the early part of the season and still be thereabouts come the turn of the year, say match day 15, match day 20, I would give them a good chance, because then from that point on, they'll be able to focus solely on the league. So as long as they're still in position come January, I think that we can look at them as being legitimate contenders, provided that they're able to keep their squad together and fit.
What does this mean for Andre Villas-Boas? Could this relaunch his career in Europe and maybe get a bigger move in a year or two?
Yeah, I do think that's a possibility. I think this is a manager who's interesting, right? We saw him sort of flame out at Spurs and Chelsea, but I think that then he went on to do rally racing or whatever he was doing.
You say you're trying new things, like the Dakar Rally. When we saw the rally driver, we thought this is amazing. You still doing some of that?
Yeah, I did a few other runs. So the last one was a rally from the World Championship of the FIA in Morocco, which I finished 6th.
And so there were some questions about his motivation. at that point in time. And I think he worked in China as well. I think that, yeah, perhaps if he's motivated to want to do this, to be a success in Europe again at the very highest level, like he had been at Chelsea and Spurs, there is an opportunity there. That said, it's tough. I don't necessarily see a lot of managers who have come out of the French league and had success. We look at Claude Puel and his time in England, Rudi Garcia's time in Rome. It's not really a path for success. I know that there have been other managers like, say, Carlo Ancelotti or Unai Emery who have gone other places as well after their times, but their reputations really weren't forged there. Now, I know obviously that Villas-Boas's reputation rests from his time in Portugal, but I think that on the whole, I really don't see him getting back to the highest level. I think that perhaps what he's better at doing as a manager is getting a team to play collectively, to collectively be more the sum of its parts. And I don't necessarily know that we've seen that per se be the case when he's been given a squad rich in talent as he had been during his 2 stints in England.
Do you think Marseille are building something special for the future, or is this something that might only just be a temporary blip in the pan?
I think it's really difficult to say they're building something for the future. Their ability to bring through young players is still a bit under question for me. Kaleta and Camara, I think, are promising younger talents, but I think beyond that, I've got a lot of questions about how Villas-Boas uses younger players. Maxime Lopez, who looked really bright under Rudi Garcia, for example, has been a bit of an afterthought. We also saw them sell Isaac Lihaji, who's a very promising young winger, to Lille this season. Or sorry, not even sell, have him leave on a free transfer to Lille. So I think that younger players from Marseille are seeing that there's a lack of opportunity to move forward. So sustainability for this project is definitely a question mark. Again, Payet is 33 at present, Mandanda is 35, Hiroki Sakai is 30 or 31 as well. So this is not exactly a young side, and I think that that's something that this team's have to deal with moving forward.
Eric Devin is a French football expert and works as a chief features writer for Get French Football News, as well as The Guardian and WhoScored. The music for this episode was provided under the Creative Commons license by Blue Dot Sessions, and you can find more information about those music tracks in our episode description. This episode was co-produced by John McKenzie. I'm Josh Schneider-Weiler, and thanks for listening to Football Today. And before you go, if you're a fan of the show and would like to support us, please sign up to our Patreon page where you'll get access to bonus episodes and extra content. And if you can't spare the cash, please tell a friend instead. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.